Wait, they were what? Assaulting a medieval fortress in a medieval manner. Well, that doesn't sound good. But did it work? No, it didn't. Right. Okay. Talk soon. Bye. November 25th, 1944. He's been trying to take it for 2 months, banging his head against it again and again and again, and at Fort Drian last month suffered his army's first real loss in the field. But this week, it finally goes his way. This week, Patton takes Metz. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the fighting on Leyte was heavy, but began turning in the Americans' favor. The Japanese continued advancing in China, though with serious communications issues. Allied attacks towards Metz and Belfort on the Western Front were in full swing, and the Allies also launched Operation Queen further north. That operation is going off all week, a stab towards Düren that should ideally carry across the Roer River, and then the 40 kilometers after that to the Rhine River. Clearing the enemy from west of the Rhine is the goal, but 12th Army Group Commander Omar Bradley thinks it could maybe be a breakout like Saint-Lô was, but it's not doing that this week at any rate. Leonard Giraud's U.S. 5th Corps joins the offensive at 9 a.m. the 21st, and they are fighting hard the rest of the week for Hürtgen. On the first day, no unit made appreciable advance except one company. The woods were as thick as ever with anti-personnel mines, with log bunkers bristling with automatic weapons, with barbed wire, and ever more with broken tree trunks and branches that obscured the soggy ground and turned any movement, even when not under enemy fire, into a test of endurance. Any hope that the enemy might not have much fight left was quickly dispelled. They take maybe 500 meters a day. Visibility is too low for any planes to help out too. Thing is, committing 5th Corps has helped Raymond Barton's 4th Division to its south. They no longer have to worry about Hürtgen and Kleinhau villages. Their next attacks go off the 22nd. Their objective is the Roer River Dam at Düren, 10 kilometers to the northeast. The problem is, though, that as 22nd Infantry drives on Großhau and 8th Infantry towards Düren, a gap will appear between them and grow. 22nd's drive is successful the first day, thanks to a deceptive feint. But by the 25th, when they make an attack on Großhau, it fails completely, and Barton orders a pause for 22nd after that. 8th Infantry is way more successful, advancing by today to a point with only about 1.5 kilometers of forest left to take. But the troops were exhausted. Because the leaders had to move about and encourage and look after their men, they had been among the first to fall. The new men had not the ability of those they replaced. Great stretches of the roads and trails were still infested with mines. Every day since the 20th of November had brought some measure of sleet or rain to augment the mud on the floor of the forest. To get supplies forward and casualties rearward, men slogged under constant threat from the shells that burst unannounced in the treetops and from bypassed enemy troops. Again, a gap had grown between the 8th Infantry and 22nd Infantry. So Barton orders a pause for the next few days, partly to get someone up there to plug the gap. But it's Joe Collins' 7th Corps to the north that's making the main effort of this whole offensive. They've been fighting on the plains and renew the offensive the 19th. Some units taking Wennau the 20th, which helps the big push towards Langerwehe. Others reaching the Roer River plain at Merode the 22nd. Other unit advances mean that by the 24th, the Germans don't really have a defense anchor left other than Langerwehe itself and Hill 203 just before it. The fighting, as it is everywhere here, is costly and bloody, but the Allies cannot take the hill or the town by the week's end. 104th Division takes Eschweiler the 22nd, leaving only a few villages to take before reaching the river Indy. They are on 7th Corps' immediate left, and since their advance has left them in line with that, they are ordered to head to and even beyond the Ruhr. By today, 104th has managed to advance to where they have dominant observation over the 3 villages in the Indy Valley. 9th Army attacks on the left of all of this are a bit more successful this week. Early in the week, 29th Division takes the villages that are defense belts around Jülich, and by the 21st are under 3 kilometers from the Roer River. By the 22nd, 2nd Armored Division have also advanced pretty close to the Ruhr, and 30th Division has also cleared Würselen Industrial District, so all 3 divisions of Ray McLean's 19th Corps are about to make a big push for the River Ruhr. McLean calls for it to go off the 26th. Also, on the 19th, U.S. 84th Division occupies Geilenkirchen, and over the next day, the Geilenkirchen salient has mainly been eliminated. 84th is directed over to defense the 23rd, after being reassigned to 13th Corps, who have arrived on the scene. Thing is, even if the German commanders around here wanted to pull back to behind the Ruhr, they instead have to hold as best they can because of the preparations going on for the upcoming German Ardennes counteroffensive in the rear. The Allies are still attacking at the southern end of the front as well. Patton was having a very tough fight in Lorraine, a campaign of bad roads, rotten weather, and above all, fierce German resistance in front of the fortress of Metz. Patton was utterly out of his element in this grinding campaign. A commander built for the high-speed chase, Patton was at his worst here, in a bit of a funk, rarely communicating with his subordinates, and hardly intervening at all in day-to-day events. But George Patton's Third Army is making progress. On the 19th, they complete the isolation of Metz, taking it the 22nd. Well, there's more to it than that, of course, so here is a bit more about Patton and Metz, which I have not yet had time to explore, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit for this. Metz had become an obsession for Patton. His earlier plan to blow past the city on his way to Berlin had been frustrated by supply shortages, unexpected enemy resistance, Allied politics, and those relentless rains that robbed the American army of its mobility. Now he was determined to reduce this ancient citadel with a double envelopment and a direct thrust across the Moselle, which virtually enfolded Metz and provided a natural breastwork to the west. The whole Metz area together has 43 forts. 43. The most modern ones actually faced west, too. There's a 19th century inner ring and an outer ring built by the Germans. There are moats, mines, interlocking machine gun fields of fire, and Patton has been butting his head up against it for some time. The attacks against Fort Driant last month were really Third Army's first big setback in the field. That fort overlooks the Moselle Valley southwest of Metz. A week of throwing everything they had against it did not have much effect. Not the artillery, not the endless infantry attacks, which were described by a reporter as, "We were attempting to assault a medieval fortress in a medieval manner." In fact, Patton ordered his 20th Corps to throw every last man at Driant if necessary because, as his chief of staff noted in the command diary, he could not allow an attack by this army to fail. Well, it did fail. So these attacks on Metz, which began back on the 8th, as we saw, were even bigger. By the 14th, 10th Armored Division had crossed the Moselle north of the city, and 90th Division was 30 kilometers to the north. South of Metz were 6 Armored and 80th Infantry Divisions. This was the planned double envelopment. 12th Corps artillery blasted hour after hour, blowing the city to bits. Adolf Hitler, of course, refused the idea of abandoning it. But by the 17th, the phones were out and the city water system had been smashed. And this week on the 19th, as I said, the encirclement of Metz is complete. General Heinrich Kittel and 6,000 prisoners are captured when the city formally surrenders at 2:35 p.m. the 22nd. Of course, several of the forts still hold out, and I'll read the future. Fort Driant doesn't yield until December 8th, and the last one, Fort Jeanne d'Arc, on the 13th. The southernmost Allied force on this front is Jake Devers' 6th Army Group, with Alexander Patch's 7th Army on the left and Jean de Latreille's French 1st on the right. They also have 15th Corps transferred in from 3rd Army, so it's nearly 500,000 men against like 9 enemy divisions on a 130 or so kilometer front from Switzerland to the Rhine-Marne Canal. They also have the terrain of the Vosges to deal with, however, since that's where they've pushed the enemy back to. Their general task, well, the same as everyone else's, is to destroy the enemy west of the Rhine. But they are to clear Alsace and secure Rhine crossings near Mannheim and Karlsruhe, while shielding the Allied southern flank. Last week, Devers launched an offensive of his own to reach the Rhine, then head north and cut off the Saar. The French kicked it off the 14th, and it took the enemy by surprise, advancing towards Belfort and the Belfort Gap. By the 19th, the French reached the outskirts of Belfort. Their right flank has passed on and soon reaches the Swiss border north of Bosso. On the 20th, advance patrols head for either Mulhouse or the Rhine. This is the French 1st Armored and 9th Colonial Divisions. They fire off the first French artillery to fall on German soil since 1940. The 22nd, the French take both Belfort and Mulhouse. However, by the end of the week, the Germans have reinforced the Rhine River line, and French First Army is stopped. The other gap in the mountains, a bit to the north, the Saverne Gap, has the main rail line from Strasbourg to Germany. Wade Hayslip's 15th Corps began picking at it from the west the 13th. They finally break a hole through the 4 layers of German defenses now on the 19th, which allows Philippe Leclerc's French 2nd Armored Division to pour through the breach. They take Saverne Town the 22nd, and then the 23rd enter Strasbourg. They raise the tricolor over the town, but the bridge over the Rhine leading to Kehl is still in German hands, and the defenses short of the bridge stiffen, holding the French back 500 meters from the river. Devers, though, wants to cross the Rhine to the north at Rastatt, speed to Karlsruhe, and trap the German First Army between Patch and Patton. So he's already sending loads of bridging equipment up there, since recon says there's not much in the way of defenders. Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower does not know of these plans, but on the 24th, he arrives with Army Group Commander Omar Bradley after meeting with Patton in Nancy. They get together with Devers, Patch, and Hayslip during the day, then after dinner at Devers Army Group headquarters in Vittel. Ike, Bradley, and Devers have a powwow. Ike, that's Eisenhower, says Patton wants 15th Corps back, and Bradley wants to at least give him 2 divisions to get him going. And then Ike is quite taken aback to learn that a big chunk of 7th Army is heading for the Rhine at Rastatt. He is, in fact, none too happy about it. Bradley says the Germans have serious defenses on the far banks, and Devers says his scout patrols have found them empty. They are empty pillboxes. They talk, argue, into the night. Devers says, aren't we supposed to be taking Rhine bridgeheads? And maybe it's 7th Army rather than 3rd that should be beefed up. And maybe Patton's army should be in Devers' army group, and together they hit the Saar. Eisenhower won't allow it. A breakthrough in the south doesn't fit into his broad front strategy. Don't get me wrong, he says. The advances in Alsace, they're great, sure. But this is far from the Ruhr, so he unequivocally orders Devers to stop. 7th Army will turn northwest of the Rhine, and the French will clear Alsace of Germans below Strasbourg. He does throw Devers a bone, though. He can keep 15th Corps, and it will even get another armored division. This does not console Devers, however. I'll have a bit more to say about Devers and this part of the front in a couple of weeks. Taking Strasbourg and Mulhouse does leave Hermann Bauch's German Army Group G with a pretty big salient west of the Rhine around Colmar, the Colmar Pocket, which I'm reasonably certain I'll also end up talking about at some point or another. Allied attacks in Italy this week are not going nearly as well as Devers, though. On the 19th, Allied armies in Italy Commander Harold Alexander's Chief of Staff, John Harding, makes an evaluation of the Italian situation. Because of British 8th Army being held, and U.S. 5th Army being inactive, the Germans have been able to build up reserves. Facing the fact that there would be no German withdrawal to the Po, and that U.S. 5th Army's rest and reorganization would not be completed before early December, it was assessed that British 8th Army, which had completed its own reorganization, could reach the Santerno River, securing bridgeheads by December. Only then would it be possible to decide whether to launch a major offensive in December or not. At 2 a.m. the 21st, British 4th Division attacks from south of the Montone, but are stopped by a minefield. Renewing the attack the next night, together with 46th Division, however, they successfully advance, even as Polish 2nd Corps takes Monterici south of Faenza. This forces Heinrich von Wiettinghoff's hand. He's in charge right now with smiling Albert Kesselringen Hospital. And he begins withdrawing his forces to the Lamone, which would both shorten the lines and create more reserves, though 356 Infantry and 114th Jaeger divisions still hold their positions. 46th Division reaches the outskirts of Faenza the 24th, but progress is stopped since the main bridge they have to cross is out. Meanwhile, 10th Indian Division has crossed the Montone, but they are stopped today before Russi. Heavy rains fall the last few days of the week, so 5th Corps Commander Charles Cately reassesses and replans the coming offensive. The Soviets actually have an offensive of theirs coming to its end this week. On the 25th, they finally take Saaremaa Island, completing the Moonsund landing operation. The heavy ships left in the German Navy, Admiral Scheer and Prince Eugen, have evacuated 5,000 troops and given covering fire over the past few days. And down in Hungary, the 22nd, Soviet 46th Army sends a few divisions across the Danube to Csepel Island, south of Budapest. German Army Group South Commander Johannes Fritzner thinks the Soviets are going to drive up towards the city, but they don't. They stop after taking the southern part of the island. South down the Danube, Fyodor Tolbuchin's 3rd Ukrainian Front has been building up its bridgeheads at Batina and Apatin lately. On the 22nd then, 4th Guards and 57th Armies break out and for the rest of the week clear the southern end of the Drava-Danube Triangle. It looks like they're gearing up for a big offensive west of the Danube. They broke out of the bridgeheads quite easily against 2nd Panzer Army. That army is soon getting a division from Italy and hoping for divisions from Army Group E whenever they can make it. But with so much partisan activity wrecking supply lines, they just couldn't do much more than screen the Soviet bridgeheads. 2nd Panzer Army, by the way, is part of Maximilian von Weich's Army Group F, as is Alexander Lohr's Army Group E. Again, Weich's chief handicap was his own earlier indecision. He had potential reserves, but no prospect of bringing them to bear in time. Army Group E's withdrawal had gone without a hitch through mid-November. Then, on the 18th, Bulgarian 2nd Army had opened a strong attack north of Skopje. The next day, Balkan Air Force bombers had destroyed the Drina Bridge at Visegrad, backing up truck and troop columns 85 miles east to Kraljevo. In Albania, strong partisan units hemmed 21st Mountain Corps in on all sides as it tried to join the retreat. Army Group E had to put back into its own front some of the troops it had intended to release, and the rest were stalled in central Yugoslavia, 200 miles and more from where they could do any good. Another Axis army having logistical problems is the Japanese in China. They are, however, still advancing. We saw last week them advancing along the railway into Guizhou province after taking Guilin and Liuzhou. They do now reach and take Dushan, which is the terminus of the railway. 11th Army then comes to a halt, having stretched its supply lines as far as they can be stretched. So they're not heading in force towards Guiyang, even though it's a pretty good target because of the U.S. Air Force facility there. The Japanese field commanders were not at all sure of their strategic premises. They had checked the Chinese temporarily, but not fatally. Our speed and limited scale of operations, one of them commented, could hardly cope with the enemy's speed in changing and equipping airfields. The only practical result of this operation was the expansion of a larger zone extending from North China to Indochina for observation of enemy air activities. On the 24th, the Japanese do capture Nanning, though, which establishes at least a rail link to Indochina and all the way up to Peking, the Operation Ishigo objective, though troops haven't linked up in force yet. An American objective in the Palaus is also nearly complete this week. The fighting on Peleliu, over 2 months old now, is finally coming to its end. The Japanese pocket in the Yuma-Brogol Mountains has been ever more constricted the past month, and the Americans have finally taken Wildcat Bowl and Death Valley. Now on the 23rd, Five Brothers falls, and the remaining Japanese defenders, including Colonel Nakagawa and Major General Murai, are inside the China Wall position, the last one. Armored bulldozers allow a ramp to be built so that tanks and flame-throwing LVTs can fire directly on the position. The 24th Nakagawa splits his 56 men into tiny groups and tells them to go out and attack the enemy everywhere they can. 25 of them are killed that night. This morning, a captured Japanese soldier informs the Americans that Nakagawa and Murai committed ritual suicide. So it's finally all over. Okay, well, not all over. Tiny pockets will still hold out here and there for months, and individual Japanese will turn up here and there on Peleliu for years to come. Seriously, breaking the timeline for a minute, in 1947, 120 Marines are sent to Peleliu to find any Japanese survivors. They find 26 of them. As for the necessity of the struggle in the first place, whether Peleliu needed taking or not remains a subject of some deliberation by generals and historians alike. But some facts are clear. MacArthur's flank was secured for his return to the Philippines, and the danger of Japanese airstrikes or troop reinforcements from the Palaus was removed. This danger, though, was minimal, as all Japanese aircraft in the Palaus had been destroyed, and few of the Japanese barges were capable of the 700-mile open sea trip to the Philippines. Several thousand first-rate Japanese troops had been eliminated, and the remaining troops in the Western Carolines could be contained by air and sea operations originating from the new American air bases on Peleliu and Angkor. The change in Japanese tactics served as an early warning to the Allies of what to expect in the forthcoming operations on the Japanese homeland. And here are a few notes to end the week. On the 19th, the British launched Operation Extended Capital, a wide front drive into Burma from the eastern Indian frontier to eventually capture Mandalay and with a following push towards Rangoon. The 20th, Adolf Hitler leaves Rostenburg and heads for Berlin, soon to establish himself in the Führerbunker. The 24th, the first B-29 flying out of Tinian raids Tokyo. And the week ends with Japanese gains in China, Soviet ones in the Baltic Islands, Allied ones in northwestern Germany, and Allied ones in Alsace that are terminated before they can enter Germany. And what about that, huh? Eisenhower saying, no, don't cross there. It doesn't fit the broad front offensive or the Ruhr offensive or whatever was said that night. But it looks, certainly in hindsight, as if Devers had a real opportunity. Rick Atkinson has this to say about that in The Guns at Last Light. Even the Army official history, published half a century after the event and disinclined to second-guess the high command, found Eisenhower's decision difficult to understand. After encouraging a bloody attack through the Vosges, Schaeff possessed neither a coherent strategic goal for its southern wing, nor the agility to exploit unexpected success. Even Patton believed Devers should have jumped the Rhine. In misusing 6th Army Group, as one historian later charged, Eisenhower unwittingly gave the Germans a respite, allowing Hitler to continue assembling a secret counteroffensive aimed at the Ardennes in mid-December. And launch date for that offensive grows closer and closer. The war certainly isn't slowing down, is it? Well, whatever happens, I will be here to cover it week by week by week until the end. And that is thanks to the efforts of the Time Ghost Army. To be part of this too, join the Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. These are the newest commissioned officers, and Brandon Fizel is the Army Member of the Week. And hey, if you don't remember when the war was moving the other direction through Western Europe in 1940, check out this episode from May 18th. That was a real game-changing week. Hunziger, right? Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.